All right, welcome to another episode of Studio 118, brought to you by Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. Come, let us reason. We got a good one for you. First of all, my name is Reuben, and to my left is the host with the most, Bunjee Garrett.
I don't know how to take that, but I'll
take it in stride.
I'll take it.
We'll see as the night progresses. But thank you for joining us. You might be joining us on YouTube, and we thank you. We got a live chat going on, so make sure to jump on there, say hi, and also we have our Q&A after, as we always do. So drop in your questions, and we'll queue them up. And also, we're streaming to Austin Cable Access Channel 11. And if you're out there, hello and welcome. And you can also queue up your question. You can call our church. That number is 512-576-5433. So we invite you to interact with us. If you have any questions about what we're going to be discussing tonight, call up the church and queue up your question. But yeah, we're here at Calvary South Austin in Austin, Texas. And we'd like to invite you to join us for our services on Sunday mornings and on Wednesday evenings. We gather together on Sunday mornings at 9:15 and 11:15 a.m. And also on Wednesday evenings, we're here at 7 p.m. And so we invite you to join us for that. Now, we've been discussing end time stuff, and we'll get into that in a bit. But let me see if there's anything else. I think those are all the announcements. But thank you for joining us again. If you also would like to share that stream link there on your social media platforms, feel free to do so. We'd love to just interact with anybody who's willing to have a good conversation. So share that, and also subscribe and like the video that you're watching right now, and that will help us out. So let's get into this. Bunjee, this is, looks like we've been kind of postponing and delaying and blah, 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 but we're finally doing it. Living in the last days, part 2.
Much like the second coming of Christ, it seemed like it would never get here.
Yes.
But here we are.
I was doubting it for a bit. I must admit, I faltered.
So last month, we had the Omicron.
Yes.
That took me out 1 week, and then I think you came down with, a cold after that?
Yeah, our whole household just
something
got knocked out for a bit.
So that kind of delayed last month. This month we had the ice storm.
That's right.
And so we had to shut down because of the ice storm. And
which is now a perennial thing. It's just
right.
It's going to happen.
Yes.
All right.
Because of
it's inevitable.
Like the climate changes or something.
Yes. Well, specific weather is not climate, is what I heard.
How dare you?
Yeah. How dare you? I should be in school.
How dare you?
Didn't know we were going to have our Greta Thunberg reference so early on.
Might as well just go ahead and get that out of the way. But so we had our ice storm, and I think El Nino, which is I think Spanish for
the Nino. We got a clip of him, right? I'm kidding.
Yeah, I guess has brought us another ice storm, but
yes.
Electricity stayed on, so that was nice.
Yeah, so typically we want to have these episodes at the beginning of the month,
right? And
that means we'll be having one 2 weeks from now, I believe, 2 Thursdays from now. So, audience, we'll be ready.
Are we? What are we doing next? Are we going to talk about JWs?
Yeah, I think JWs and their understanding of who Jesus is.
Yep.
So, who is Jesus to the JWs?
Nice.
So looking forward to that. Yeah.
Certainly.
So audience, look out for announcements on that. It's going to be a good one.
But got pushed out with the. With the ice storm, and then the following week we had the HEA conference to gear up for.
That's right.
So we couldn't do it last Thursday because of just all the setup involved with our marriage conference. Which if you missed that, then we'll have the audio recordings of that available shortly at calvarymarriage.com, which that should be up here pretty soon. Yeah. But so here we are, first free Thursday that we've had since the ice storm.
Yep.
And happy to get back to it. Happy to be discussing one of my favorite biblical topics, which is eschatology, and specifically living in the end times, living in the last days, and considering the signs that the Lord Jesus detailed he helped his disciples to understand what the world will be like leading up to his second coming. And if I remember our last show a month ago, we kind of covered, well, how do we know Jesus is telling the truth? How do we know that he is a reliable source when it comes to his second coming? And so we kind of addressed that.
Yeah, because I think, at least you try to come out from an outsider perspective, right? If I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, who's telling me the truth? And especially when it comes to prophecy, right? It's always one of those things where, there's a lot of people saying things about the future, and there always has been. And so I could get it how somebody's eyebrows would be raised and be like, are you really telling me the real deal here? And so we wanted to establish first and foremost that Jesus is a reliable source.
If the Mayans couldn't get it right.
Yeah, that was really our last chance if you're on naturalism, that's all you had. So if you want to catch that movie 2012, I'll tell you everything you need to know.
Apocalypso.
Yes. Yes. Trust Mel Gibson.
So but one of the things that we landed on last month was we took some time to consider some of the short-term prophecies that Jesus presented, and then we tested them to see if they came to pass. We saw that they did. Therefore, we can then give greater weight to the end time prophecies that he presented. And this really was, just a classic way of the Jews to test the prophets in their days. The Lord would give the prophets short-term prophecies that could be tested so that then the credibility could be established to believe the long-term prophecies. And so it's just a tool that the Lord enabled the Israelites to use during the days of the prophets. And it's the same tool that we use today. We've examined the prophecies of Jesus Christ. The short-term prophecies all came to pass. For example, we're talking this evening again about the destruction of the temple. And we're going to be considering some of the prophecies that Jesus was revealing about the time of his second coming. And all that's going to play in together with, information about the return of Israel and all these sorts of things. And so with that, let's, get back into this incredible subject, one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, so if audience watching us here, we find ourselves back in Matthew chapter 24 in the New Testament. And as Bunjee mentioned last time, in our last episode, we started off at the beginning of Matthew chapter 24 where they're departing from the temple, and he is essentially speaking to his disciples, and he gives there's a question that's raised, and they want to know basically when will all these things be? When is, in their brains, it's the end of the age, the last days. When is this grand event going to happen? And Jesus goes on to, he leaps right into, I think that first prophecy is about the destruction of the temple. Is that right? Where he essentially tells his disciples that not one stone will be left upon another.
Right.
So this was one example of that short-term prophecy that we covered last time. And sure enough, I think we walked through the evidence showing that in 70 AD was a very clear picture that the temple at the time was raised. It was raised to the ground. All the stones that, just like Jesus said, were toppled over,
right,
and they were just a complete destruction of that temple.
Yes.
And so it was just a clear manifestation of this short-term prophecy that Jesus gave.
Yeah, the Romans actually set the temple on fire, which then turned all the gold into liquid, and the liquid gold, went down into the cracks of the stones. And, these stones were massive. There's even foundational stones right now. They're on Temple Mount that are as big as a city bus. And they're just massive, massive stones. And so, when they determined to retrieve all the gold that had melted down into the cracks, well, they had to basically dismantle the temple brick by brick, so that they could retrieve the wealth, before departing.
Wow.
And so just as Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 24, he says, that he says, do you see all these things? And of course, they're there at the temple. Jesus went out and departed from the temple. His disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus says, do you not see all these things? Do you not see the temple and all the surrounding structures? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And so we saw that prophecy come to pass there in 70 AD. And then they ask him, his disciples sitting on the Mount of Olives, which is across the valley and up the hill. So they're overlooking Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. And the disciples say to him, hey, when will these things be? Mm-hmm. Well, what things? Well, the destruction of the temple. And then they ask, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So this line of questioning is all about when is the temple going to be destroyed, and when is the second coming going to take place, and when will the end of the age be? Yeah. So interesting question here. And as we looked at, just by way of review from last month, we went on to examine the signs that Jesus presents in Matthew 24, which we mainly find there in verses 4 through 12. Right. There he goes on to list false Christs, wars, rumors of wars. Are they going to invade Ukraine or not? Yes. Famines, which we talked about, the price of fertilizer, how that's offsetting corn production, which is going to throw off feed for animals, and just everything that's going to happen as a result of that. We talked about pestilences, plagues, diseases, viruses, and these sorts of things. Yeah. We talked about earthquakes in various places and other sorts of natural disasters. Talked about the persecution of the church. We talked about lawlessness, and then the fact that the love of many will grow cold during this time, and people will take offense easily, to every little thing, like you didn't use my proper pronouns, so now I'm really mad at you, and I'm going to go make a YouTube video. That's right. I'm sorry. I will make a YouTube video about this and tell the world how upset I am because you didn't use my pronouns.
Hopefully it's monetized.
Easily offended. That's what Jesus said would happen, and that's what we see happening. Just go watch TikTok.
Go watch TikTok. Actually, do we want to go watch TikTok?
Go watch TikTok. You know what I'm saying, right?
Go give all your private information up.
Yes.
That's what I heard.
Would you like China to have all of your information and your DNA? 23andMe.
Nice.
And TikTok together.
Ooh, now that's an interesting merger there.
There it is.
So yes, there's plenty of examples on what the world is going through today, and it's kind of teetering on a razor's edge here of just very sensitive to, especially the wars and the rumors of wars. I mean, this honestly has been going on since history. Sure. A lot of wars and stuff, but when you see the players, the characters in play, you have Russia and China. And then all the countries surrounding Israel that are constantly just calling for the extinction and destruction of Israel as a nation state. And so these things always seem to be just escalating ever so closely to the brink of all-out war. Yeah. And so we definitely have to be paying attention to that. I think that was the gist of last episode, was essentially for Christians to wake up, to be alert of these things going on around us, because as Jesus mentioned, these are going to be the signs of the times, and we should just be keen to what's going on around us.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think you're building up towards here is the promise that Jesus makes here in Matthew 24, because in the middle of all of these descriptors for the last days, he also provides us with kind of a scale, and he does this by saying that all these are the beginning of sorrow. So, in Matthew 24, he says that there's going to be many who come in my name, saying I'm the Christ. They're going to deceive many. You're going to hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these, he says, are the beginning of sorrows. And that word sorrows gives us an indicator here that helps us to understand that all of these things, while they have been happening, throughout the entire history of the world, they're going to happen more often. The word sorrows there is the word that's used to describe birth pangs. Mm-hmm. And, I've never,
Careful now.
I want to be careful here. But, yeah, so when we consider the birth pangs that a woman experiences leading up to birth, and I know that you want me to get the genders correct here.
Yeah, birthing people. Yeah.
The birthing people, when they birth people, they experience these birth pangs, which become more frequent,
right,
and more intense.
Correct.
And so when we consider, when he says all these are the beginning of sorrows, he's basically saying all these are the beginning of birth pangs. So what that means is that we should see more and more famines happening more frequently and more intensely, more pestilences, more earthquakes, more wars and rumors of wars.
So this is pretty dark and depressing. It's going to get worse, is essentially what you're saying.
Right.
And so this, number one, just kind of maybe it just kind of punctures that little, bubble that a lot of Christians probably live in today of, let's bring heaven down and let's make the world
Dominion
better.
Theology group?
Perhaps, yes.
The manifest sons of Christ, we're bringing in the kingdom.
We got to bring the kingdom down to earth and essentially turn earth into heaven.
Right.
And, but yeah, we can make a lasting change and just make things better. But it seems here at least that Jesus is telling us that you'll know when I'm coming back, when things are starting to get worse more frequently, and it's going to be more intense.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just getting clear picture there.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. Jesus here is telling us that all of these signs. So remember, they're asking, what's the sign of your coming and the end of the age?
The end of the age.
And when are these things going to happen? And so Jesus doesn't give us a date. He doesn't give us a hour. He doesn't give us a year. But what he does say is, hey, all of these things are going to happen. And when they begin to happen, recognize that this is just the beginning of the birth pangs. Just the beginning. And so we considered those birth pangs last month.
That's right.
And we really kind of drilled down into, are we seeing these things happen? And are we seeing them happen with greater frequency and greater intensity? And I think we saw enough evidence from the news that would lead us to believe that is the case.
Right.
Then Jesus goes on to give us some description of what it's going to be like in the tribulation time, and we kind of passed over that. We didn't really consider it last week. We're not going to spend a lot of time considering that this evening either. Yeah. And one reason why is because, as pre-tribulation millennialists, we believe that the church will be gone, raptured prior to the revealing of the Antichrist. The Antichrist, from what we can tell from Daniel chapter 9, the Antichrist is going to be revealed through his enforcement and possible creation of a peace treaty there in the Middle East, which has led some as myself to believe that the Antichrist might have a Jewish mother and an Arab father. The Arabs recognize the bloodline through the father, the Jews through the mother, and so you could potentially have an Antichrist character who has an Arab father and a Jewish mother, who then is used to establish peace in the Middle East. We know that the Antichrist has to be Jewish because he's going to be accepted by the Jews as their Messiah. Yeah. And so, understanding, though, that the church will be raptured, the restrainer will be removed, and with the restraining work of the Holy Spirit, the church being sealed by the Holy Spirit will then be raptured prior to the revealing of the Antichrist, which then kicks off the 7-year time of tribulation, which is then it culminates in the second coming of Christ, followed by the millennial 1,000-year reign. Yeah. So there's a whole lot to unpack in all of that. Of course. But we're really more considering what are the signs of the last days, right? Yeah. Are we living in the last days? That's really what we're asking. Are we living in the last days? And if so, how would we know that? So if you missed last month's study, go back and listen to or watch the Living in the Last Days Part 1. Part 2, we're going to spend more time focusing in on some parallels that Jesus goes on to present us with towards the final sections of this chapter.
Yeah.
So getting past, Jesus describing the tribulation time, then he kind of backs out of that and drills down into verse 32, where he presents us with this parallel, this allegory.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's jump in there and let's see what Jesus is sharing with his disciples. So as Bunjee mentioned, we're starting in Matthew 24, there in verse 32, and I'll go ahead and read it. This is Jesus speaking. He tells his disciples, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near."
That's right.
Yeah. "So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place."
Wow.
All right.
You like figs?
You like figs? I like figs.
You like figgy pudding?
I don't know about figgy pudding. I don't know. Nice. So yes, Jesus he goes on to share this parable with his disciples. Now, yeah, the parables are typically, and this is, I guess, what's typically done as a rabbi would, is in order for a lesson to be taught, it was, I guess, much easier to share it in the form of a parable, which is a story, kind of like with a moral story at the end, right? And very allegorical, where each character represents something very direct. And so we have here, it's an earthly story with heavenly meaning.
It's also interesting to remind you that Jesus spoke in parables so that those who had ears to hear would hear, and that those who didn't want to hear wouldn't know what he was talking about. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it's the concept there being that, look, if you want to know what Jesus is talking about, he'll give you the wisdom to understand it. But if you don't want to know, you'll just think he's rambling.
Yes. Yeah, because there were at least a handful of times where his disciples even, who had already been following him for quite some time, and they were still asking him. And I think it was the parable of the seeds being thrown, by the wayside and whatnot. And he says, "How long have you been with me, and you still don't know the meaning of these things," right? And that's where he says, "Let him who has ears, let him hear."
To the unbeliever, the stories that Jesus tells is just kind of like, maybe some elderly president talking about throwing dead dogs on doorsteps. I don't know. I mean, what is the guy saying?
Or true international depression.
True international depression.
Yeah.
But the point, though, is that, Jesus spoke in parables so that the people who didn't want to listen, they don't want to know.
Yes.
Well, you'll never take the time to say, "What do you mean by that?"
Yes.
But the people who wanted to know would come to him and say, "Hey, can you explain this parable to us?" And then he would explain it.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, right? So, even within the church, much like a lot of the followers of Jesus at that time, and he even calls them out, he says, they only follow me because they're hungry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They know that at some point I'm going to do a miracle and, produce a lot of loaves of bread and a lot of fish.
And I'm going to be honest that the first morning I went to church with the guy that led me to the Lord, it's because he took me to McDonald's first.
Yeah. All right, I'll go.
I'll follow you for the free pancakes.
Wow, so McDonald's doing the Lord's work, huh? All right.
Yeah.
We're not sponsored, by the way.
They are golden arches.
Nice. Along on the streets of gold.
And those hash browns are heavenly.
Hello. All right, well, back to reality here. So yes, this parable has different components to it, and that's what we want to break down to help you, the audience, have a good understanding, and then we'll take it from there. To remember, we're focusing in on what will be the signs of the end of the age and the signs of the Lord's second coming here. And so what are the components here? Well, first of all, we have this fig tree. He says it is a parable of the fig tree.
Yes.
And he mentions how when its branch has already become tender, it's going to put forth leaves. So he's describing basically the plant process.
Right.
But why a fig tree? Why that in particular? So maybe that's a good jumping off point there.
Well, figs are delicious.
Number one, yes.
And they were plentiful there in the land of Israel.
True. Yeah.
But there are a few Old Testament passages that actually compare the people of Israel to figs, and therefore the fullness of Israel then would be comparative to a fig tree. So like in Jeremiah 24, we find Jeremiah says, the Lord showed me, and there were 2 baskets of figs set before the temple of the Lord after Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah were the craftsmen and smiths from Jerusalem and had brought them to Babylon. 1 basket had very good figs, like the figs that are first ripe, and the other basket had very bad figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. Shame. So these 2 baskets of figs were the people. They were symbolic of the people who had been carried away. Yeah. So it's like the figs were pulled from the tree, and carried away in 2 baskets to Babylon. We also see Hosea talking about, he says, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. And so once again, the children of Israel being compared to grapes on a vine or figs on a tree.
Very good.
Yep.
So then we have the fig tree, and now he mentions that, yes, so he talks about the growth process of this fig tree. So when its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So the branch becoming tender and putting forth leaves, and this is signifying that another season is drawing near. What can we gather from this statement of Jesus here?
Well, it's a good question. So it seems to me like the fig tree is a symbol of Israel. It also seems like it's a symbol of Israel's prosperity. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 4. It talks about Solomon's dominion here, and it says that he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river from Tifsa even to Gaza. Namely over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side all around him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So here we see this description of Israel under the leadership of Solomon, which I'll remind you that Solomon's father, David, was a man of war, and he secured the land of promise for the people of Israel. Solomon then became a king of peace, and under his leadership, everyone from Dan to Beersheba, which is the most northern part of Israel, to the most southern part, and from the river all the way to Gaza, they all had their own fig tree to sit under and to enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? So the fig tree in that sense is Israel's prosperity. Yeah. Israel prospering in the land as each person sits under their own fig tree and enjoys the fruits, right?
Interesting.
And so in light of this, it seems to me that the fig tree that Jesus is referring to, it's since it's the parable of the fig tree, well, the fig tree is probably Israel. And so with that being the case, then what's interesting is that with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD came the dispersion. And there was already a slow dispersion happening up until that point in time. But at 70 AD, when they came in and razed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, that's really when the dispersion of the Jews really ramped up, all the way to 135 AD, which I think that was the invasion led by Hadrian, I think it was. And at that point in time, in 135 AD, the Jews were forbidden access to Jerusalem.
Wow.
So they were completely chased out of the land of promise at this point in time.
Yeah.
And while that's not to say there was no remnant, I do believe that there's probably been a small remnant of Israelites in the promised land the whole time, but it wasn't like they were a state. It wasn't like they were enjoying the prosperity of a fully blossoming fig tree. Yeah. No, they were dispersed into the Gentile nations, scattered abroad, and they remained that way for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
What's also interesting about that, though, so by 135 A.D., the Jews are all but gone from the land of promise. And yet Jesus is pointing to a day when the fig tree, will begin to bud again. Mm-hmm. And that parable of the fig tree is in the context of that question, what will it be like before your return? So putting all those pieces together, the disciples are saying, what's it going to be like before your return, before the end of the age? Jesus gives all these, dark promises about wars and plagues and these sorts of things. And then after describing the time of tribulation, then says, but take note to the parable of the fig tree. Mm-hmm. When it starts budding again, that's when summer is near.
Yeah.
Well, so this corresponds with another prophecy that we find in Ezekiel chapter 37.
Yeah, let's go there.
So it's in Ezekiel 37 that the prophet Ezekiel is talking about these dry bones. God takes him to this field. There's a bunch of dry bones. Everything's dead. And then God says, can these dry bones live again?
Yeah.
And Ezekiel's like, well, Lord, you know. So skipping on down, after kind of considering this whole scene and after the Lord kind of brings him to a point of understanding, it's here in Ezekiel 37, verse 11, where the Lord says to Ezekiel, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They indeed say, our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. They were cut off from their land. Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. Then you shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up from your graves. I will put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and performed it, says the Lord.
Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah. And so imagine to be Ezekiel in that time, probably thinking, what? Cut off, Yeah. And just trying to conceive of a day where the people of Israel would be driven out of their own land. That's intense.
Yeah, most certainly. And I believe that the fullness of this prophecy is fulfilled in the time of Israel's rebirth, which really started kind of happening back in the early 1900s.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, where, so as you mentioned, by 135, pretty much all the Jewish people were driven out of Jerusalem. And as you mentioned, it's over a millennia that they were gone. They were never of one people, one nation again.
Yeah, they got dispersed into the Gentile world. They kind of broke up into 4 different groups, which I'm not going to really get into all the details of that. But yeah, in 4 different main areas, you see the Jews dwelling, throughout the time of their dispersion, up until about the I think probably early 1900s, when you start seeing a small trickle, returning. Mm-hmm. According to some information that I found, the World Zionist Organization actually founded its office in the Land of Promise in 1908.
Yeah.
So there's already some sort of return to Israel at that point in time.
Some plan, at least.
Yeah, some small trickle, of people returning to the Land of Promise. They immediately went to work on land acquisition, agriculture, and urban expansion. That's when they started developing these, communes. Mm-hmm. I believe the term is kibbutz or kibbutzim, mm-hmm. plural, and so they started forming these communes, where people would come together in communities and work together in what was a real at risk of sounding like I'm promoting socialism, it was socialistic to a certain degree, which, I believe works on a small scale, specifically like in my home. My wife and I are socialists, mm-hmm. As a family, we put our money into one bank account and use it as needed, right?
Yeah.
When you get up to a national level, it no longer works. It doesn't work at that level. But they had these small communes that were, everybody basically did their part, and it was communistic in a certain way, of you do your job, I'll do my job, and everybody will get everybody's work done, and we all benefit together from it. It's not going to work today. That wouldn't work for Israel at the amount of the people that are living in the land now. But back then it worked for the rebirth of Israel.
Yeah.
And so Hebrew high schools in Israel were established around 1912. The first Hebrew high schools, 1912. Hebrew University began classes at its Mount Scopus campus in 1925. And there were more than 36 settlements. These kibbutzim were already established in Israel by the mid 1930s. And I've actually been to one of these. The place is still there. You can come in and it's still kind of an active community. And you order your lunch there. They bring you just a beautiful plate of food. You can just spend the day at this early rebirth of Israel kibbutz.
That's cool.
And then there was another 36 settlements built by the time the Nazis invaded Poland.
So there was a strong desire for, we don't know like the initial, what sparked it, but there was a desire already for God's people, the apple of his eye, to come together again and begin organizing and creating a community.
You see them, it's almost like you see God working in the hearts of some very talented leaders to go and set the foundations for what was about to happen, with the Holocaust and the return, of more Israelites, right? So that brings us to, the Holocaust, World War II,
then,
and the rebirth of Israel ramped up after the catastrophic events, of the Holocaust. So Hitler's final solution, as horrific as this was, as horrible as it was, and in no way do I want to sound like I was just kind of like, yeah, it kind of worked out, right? I don't want to even dance on the edge of that conversation, right? It was, what Hitler did was so horrific, and so, to refer to this group of people that God says are the apple of my eye, and call them subhumans. And not worthy of life, and standing in the way of evolution and keeping us from becoming superhuman and these sorts of things, right? I mean, the whole final solution of Hitler was just evil, it was satanic, and it was horrible. And God used it. God used it to help his people to see that it's time to return to their land and fulfill the Ezekiel 37 prophecy.
Yeah, it's amazing that, even those events did not, you would think it would be an easy thing for you to just say, we're done. There's no hope now, and look what our entire people have gone through. But that didn't knock them down and out. Mm-hmm. They still continued, they persevered. I think that's amazing.
Very cool. So then, basically, after the Holocaust, the surviving Jews, looked for a place to go.
Yeah.
And everybody kept, turning them away. And so finally, they decided, hey, we're going to Israel.
Yeah.
We're going to the land of promise. And then on May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, he was the head of the Jewish Agency. He proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. President Truman recognized the new nation on the same day. And immediately, Israel's Declaration of Independence, which took place on May 14th, 1948, basically wound up the armies of 6 Arab countries, including Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. And together with the local Arab militia, they attacked the budding Jewish state from every direction.
Wow. They didn't waste any time.
Yeah. They immediately went to battle.
Wow.
So according to one historian, the Arab goal was to prevent the implementation of the UN partition resolution and to violently remove the Jews from the land, which is what they have continued. Many of these groups have continued to do.
Yeah, it's been this is what to live in Israel. I think as a Jew that's what you're just faced with every single day of your life.
Yep. And since then, Iran's been fueling the fires of proxy wars, whether it be the use of Hezbollah or Hamas, or the Houthis. So Iran's been supplying weapons and everything that these groups need to just continue to put pressure on Israel, and it's clear to me that they're gearing up for a nuclear attack on Israel as they continue with these attempts to acquire more and more uranium and whatnot. So without getting into all that. During this battle, during the War of Independence, the Lord enabled Israel to fight off. I mean, they're
even as a small people.
They don't even hardly have a military yet, and yet the Lord gave them the ability to fight off these 6 nations, as well as the entrenched Arab militia there. Wow. And so in the end, Israel not only ejected the invading Arab forces, but it also captured and held new land that was beyond the partition that the United Nations was offering. So the United Nations says, here, we'll give you this. The Arab nation says, no, you can't even have that. Mm-hmm. And God says, oh yeah, they're going to take that and more.
Yes.
And Israel at that point in time was officially reborn, which is very interesting because up until this period of time, most Christian theologians had no concept of a literal rebirth of Israel.
Right.
So when it comes to eschatology and the church, I remember listening to one talking head recently talking about, that he's a pre-trib, premillennialist, but recognizes that it's a bit of a late invention in the church. Mm-hmm. And then really couldn't give an explanation of why it's a late invention. Well, there's a really good reason why it's a late invention. First of all, when you look at the early Catholic Church, they thought that they were the replacement of Israel. So if there is no Israel in the land, and there's all these promises, everlasting promises made to Israel, and then there's some statements that Paul makes in Romans that, you can kind of make an argument that maybe the church is the replacement of Israel. It's a stretch on the text, but I could see where someone looks and sees there's no Israel in the land, and here's some, promises that look kind of like, we're the new Israel, and so we'll interpret it that way. And so, hey, let's go acquire our land. And so the Crusades happen, and next thing you've got this complete misconception, of who Israel is, what Ezekiel 37 even means, and what should we be looking for by way of end time events, right? So there were a few theologians along the way who were truly expecting a return of Israel to the land. But they were few and far between. Early on, it was mainly replacement theology. Mm. So now, as of 1948, we see the Bible in a completely new light, which then drives a new paradigm for interpreting biblical eschatology. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, Ezekiel 37 is literal. Mm. So then Ezekiel 38 is probably literal. So then now, you see where this completely changes our perspective on end time events.
Ezekiel 38 is that the war?
That's Gog and Magog. So Israel's dwelling with, in a time without walls, and then Russia, leads. How about that?
There you go.
Russia leads, several kind of a confederation of nations against Israel to, God's dragging them down with a hook in the jaw, and so there's all that. So should we expect there to be a new understanding of eschatology from 1948 forward? Well, of course. Yeah. There's new light. There's new light on the book of Revelation. There's new light on 2 Thessalonians. There's new light, on these passages that point to the end time. So, yeah, it only makes sense for us to now realize that, the eschatological position of most Christians in the majority of the church age is probably wrong, because most of them were not looking for a complete rebirth, a literal fulfillment of the dry bones prophecy of Ezekiel 37.
Very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you can tell this is one of your favorite subjects.
I do love this topic.
I dabble.
I've read a few things.
All right, so we've established that the fig tree then is more than likely symbolizing Israel.
Seems to be that way.
And this budding that Jesus is talking about is this rebirth of Israel.
Don't get crazy, Joe Rogan. We're not talking about budding.
No, I don't know about that.
Hey, bud. Yeah, we're not about to start selling CBD oil here. They used to call it snake oil. Now it's CBD oil.
Nice.
It'll cure what ails you. Maybe.
I mean, it'll take it down a notch.
Okay.
All right. So
what is this budding? What?
Yeah.
So if the fig tree is Israel, then what would the budding be?
Yeah, so let's read that verse again there, right?
Let's do it.
Jesus says, "Learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves." So putting forth leaves seems to be what we want to focus in on. And I guess just agriculturally speaking, right? So he's talking about summer is near, and so the budding, when everything comes to harvest and all that, is usually occurring in the spring.
Right.
So then this leaves us open with some options here. I guess go ahead here.
Yeah, so if it's true that the fig tree is Israel, then the Israelites being back in their land would be the planting of the tree, so to speak, right? So the tree was planted, let's say, in 1948.
Yep.
So then it starts growing, and without spending too much time getting into the Levitical approach at planting, pruning, and producing fruit, yes. There was a 5-year plan that you pluck the buds in the first 3 years, and that way the branches can get strong enough to hold the fruit. If you allow the tree to bear fruit, early on, then it'll actually wreck the branches and whatnot. So with that concept coming out of the book of Leviticus, we certainly would recognize that God is going to allow the tree to bear, to get strong enough to bear the fruit that we're talking about. So at the point in time when the budding is no longer plucked, but rather allowed to then produce the fruit, I can't help but to wonder, is this the time when, Israel would then acquire the fullness of the land, or Jerusalem at the very least? The UN partitioned a specific amount of land, for the returning Israelites. Then the Arabs tried to stop that.
Yep.
The War of Independence happened. They took more land. But then came 1967, when we see another battle happening, which has become since known as the 6-Day War. And Israel was once again in 1967 compelled to fight for its existence. And that's when Israel captured the Jordanian-occupied West Bank, which is very strategic. Then on June the 7th, Israeli paratroopers liberated the old city of Jerusalem. And so it was at that point in time when they secured Jerusalem, for the people of Israel. And then the fighting ended on June 10th after Israel conquered the Golan Heights, which, again, another strategic location there. So, Israel did great things, the Lord enabling them within the course of 6 days to further secure the land, including capturing Jerusalem. Which then, they started, kind of giving some stuff back, and so it's kind of they didn't maintain all of it. There's the Muslim Waqf which is kind of overseeing Temple Mount, and so it's like this shared responsibility, and we don't have time to get into all of that. But some people have taken the budding of the fig tree to mean, or they think it points to 1967 when Israel gained some level of control over Jerusalem. And then you've seen people, even our own famous, Pastor Chuck Smith, work out if-then calculations that if this is the budding of the fig tree and if this is a generation, then this is the amount of time before the second coming, right? Nah. And, I think that there's some dangers in that, but hey, as long as you're not saying, thus saith the Lord, here's the date. Some people have accused Pastor Chuck of setting dates, and it's like, well, he didn't set a date. He just kind of presented, a logical scenario that if this means this and if that means that, then it only stands to reason that we should expect this to happen. That's not date setting. That's just sanctified speculation.
Sure.
Or maybe not so much sanctified.
Didn't catch that verse, huh?
But then so if you could run the calculation from 1967 and say that the acquisition of Jerusalem is the beginning of the budding, and maybe that's the case. Okay. You could also make the argument that the budding won't start until they actually have a third temple. Yeah. That would definitely be a clear evidence that the fig tree is budding if Israel's able to rebuild their temple.
So yeah, if you would, just for a little bit, for our audience especially, why is the building of the temple important?
Sure. So you have some prophecies in the scriptures that point to a third temple. In the book of Revelation, we see John being told by an angel to measure the temple and leave out the court of the Gentiles. And so, as that being an end times book on prophecy, in order for John to have measured a temple, which again is future tense, in order for there to be a temple to measure in the future, then that temple would have to be built, right? Yeah. Also, we see Paul in 2 Thessalonians talking about, the Antichrist sitting in the temple of God, claiming to be God. That happens in the middle of the 7-year tribulation.
This is the abomination of desolation.
That's the abomination of desolation, right? So, in order for the Antichrist to enter a temple and present himself as God, there has to be a temple for him to sit in, right? So again, another prophecy that points to the temple. And we certainly see evidence that the Jews are preparing for the construction of a third temple, and so the question is how are they going to work out the logistics? You've got a Muslim mosque up there. You've got some real issues with the construction of the temple. You've got the Dome of the Rock. So there's problems. Some believe that this temple will be built after the Ezekiel 38 war, after Israel pushes the surrounding nations back and destroys them, and then secures their land, and they believe that at that point in time the temple is going to be built. Others make the argument that Temple Mount actually sits lower in what's now called the City of David. And so you have those who believe that what's currently called Temple Mount is actually the foundation of the Fortress Antonia, and that the temple actually sits a little bit lower, and that it was completely wiped, from the map. And the stones that you even see today were actually Roman built for that Fortress Antonia, because you do find a passage in the book of Acts that talks about how Pilate came down from the fortress to the temple, and you don't talk that way when it comes to the Temple Mount. You always go up to Jerusalem, you always go up to the temple, and yet here you have Pilate coming down from the Fortress Antonia. So it would seem to suggest that the fortress at a little higher than Temple Mount did. But so again, speculation there. But yeah, there's got to be a third temple just for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And then we see, the temple foundation has already created all of the furniture, except for the Ark of the Covenant, of course, which there are those who insist that they know where the Ark of the Covenant is. Yeah. I think they found it back in the 80s when Indiana Jones went and battled the Germans. But
and melted their faces.
Faces got melted. It was weird. But you saw that documentary
True
too.
Story. Yeah.
But no, but so there are those who argue that that they've known where the Ark of the Covenant is the whole time. Some say it's in Ethiopia. Some say it's.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Some say it's buried, deep underneath a Temple Mount. But it's so we don't know at this point in time. But everything else has been created. The shovels, the tongs, the priestly gear. They've already identified who the Levites are, and so I mean they've already basically done everything except build a temple and pull the ark out of storage.
From a Jewish perspective, though, they wouldn't be looking at New Testament prophecy for the creation of the third temple. They're mainly wanting to begin sacrificing again.
Yeah, not to say that they're not aware of New Testament prophecy. I certainly have come across, like reading, news out of Israel. They seem to be, well aware of what the New Testament says, but yeah. So no, that I think that they mourn the fact that there's no temple, and I believe that it's in their heart to build a temple because I think God has put it in their heart to build a temple. And so, I believe now that's not true of every Jew. I mean, there's atheists who are, Jewish atheists, right? So it's not to say that everyone in Israel is, keen on building a third temple, but all of the religious Jews, as far as I know, are completely geared up for a third temple.
Yeah.
And so then, we see this article here. It says this: after being lost for 1,600 years, the biblical blue dye is returning in force with over 270,000 sets of fringes being made to date. The factory that produces the pigment from the murex snail is gearing up to triple its production but they know that the redemption is near, and the third temple will need even more of the precious dye to start operations. So in this, we see them getting ready to produce, tapestries and that would be used at the tabernacle, and the zizits, which were ritual fringes worn by Jewish men. And so, with all of that, that we see them producing this purple dye, for the use of the priests and for the tapestries that will hang there in the temple. Also the red heifer, the blood of the red heifer to anoint the ground, for the construction. And, we see all this coming to pass, and you see them getting very excited to the point where, again, the Temple Institute has already, created everything necessary for.
And they have all the dimensions. They even have, I think, small scale models of what it would look like, and they're pretty much ready. As once there's a go sign, it's only a matter of how long.
Right.
Do you remember how long it would be if they had everything in place?
I think they could have the temple built in under 3 years.
Yeah.
Or under 4 years, I think it is. I think it was like 3.5 years or so. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It's about 3 years, if I remember correctly. I'm so bad with numbers. But yeah. So from shovel in the ground, so to speak, to throwing the first burnt offering on the burnt altar. I think it's like 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a date to set.
What's interesting is that if they start building the temple at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, it's completed by the time the abomination of desolation happens.
Interesting. Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yep. Very interesting. So that's another option, is the fact that some people are looking at the creation of the temple as being the budding. Gotcha.
That could be the budding.
Very cool.
But then the budding might be the budding. Remember, the figs represented the people being carried away. So the budding turns into the fig, right? Yeah. And so is this about population?
Yeah, about more people.
And so here's an article from 2018 Israel booms with babies as developed world's birth rates plummet. So everywhere around the world, birth rates are plummeting, except in Israel, where birth rates are booming. Families have an average of 3.1 children, which that fourth child is limited.
Yeah, not even a half brother, half sister.
Yeah, he's
Or 10%.
So, but seriously, so in other areas of the world, the average family has 1.7 in developed countries, where in Israel it's 3.1 amongst the Israel's population, which currently numbers 8.7 million. Now that was 2018. And they project, based on this birth rate, that the population could soar to 15 million by 2050.
Wow.
So they're booming with babies. They're budding.
And they're all going to fit there, huh?
Well, that was one of the concerns about the article is, where are these people going to go?
Yes.
So you have that, but then what's also interesting is when we look at the parallel passage from Luke chapter 21, which we're going to get to on Sundays here in a couple of months.
There we go, yeah.
It says there in Luke 21, he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. Now that's interesting because now we're gaining a broader perspective. We've got the fig tree and all the trees, right? Well, what trees? All the trees in Israel, right? And in the same article, we see Gentile populations in Israel also increasing. So one example is in the Jewish state, which has a sizable Arab minority. It makes up 20% of the population, and as of 2018, their birth rate also stands at 3.1 children per family.
Man, must be something in the water over there.
There is definitely something in the water. I went over
is
there.
in the air.
I went over there a couple of years ago and drank the water and got pregnant. So it was crazy.
Never gave birth though, huh?
Still working on it.
Still working on it. Still cooking. So yes, the budding could be a boom in population.
Soylent Greenest people.
Yeah. But I guess one question for me obviously would be, okay, well, what's the cutoff, right? How would you know it's okay? This is the budding,
right?
How many people?
Yeah.
Right.
Or to get even more literal.
Whoa.
The figs could be figs.
Really?
So, according to information compiled there on Wikipedia, Israel is one of the world's leading fresh citrus producers and exporters, including oranges, grapefruits, tangerines, and a hybrid of grapefruit and pomelo, which was developed in Israel.
Love me a good pomelo.
Yeah, is that what it's called? Pomelo?
I think so. That's what I said.
So more than 40 types of fruit are grown in Israel, in addition to citrus, avocados, bananas, apples, olives, cherries, figs, plums, nectarines, grapes, dates, strawberries, prickly pear, persimmon, and then loquat.
Those are good too.
Which is and then pomegranates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see the woman going off about pomegranates?
I didn't.
I'll send you a link. So, no pomegranates. All right. So, but here we see, this idea of Israel being this massive producer and exporter of literal fruit, including figs, right? So, I remember when we talked earlier from 1 Kings about how the nation of Israel each man would sit under their own fig tree.
Yes.
And enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? And if you look at Israel right now, like if you even go look at a satellite map or a satellite image of Israel, you can see where the borders are just by what's green.
It's like an oasis.
It's incredible.
Right. Yeah.
It's
They're
absolutely incredible.
Perfectly situated in the middle of a desert.
In 1948, the place was just in shambles. It looked like some just land that had been left to just decay. Yeah. And since then, they've developed new ways to process water, desalination of the Dead Sea, different ways of growing crops in the desert. I mean, it's just they have turned this place into land that just overproduces fruit. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So the budding of the fig tree might literally be the budding of the fig tree.
When you see the exports going out, that's when you know summer is near.
And what's interesting about this is that, apart from the construction of the temple, all these other things have come to pass. Like, we're watching it happen before our very eyes.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about the rebirth of Israel, the fig tree returning and growing and producing fruit, whether we're talking about that being population or whether that's, the acquisition of land, even when Trump was in office, he took that bold step of declaring Jerusalem to be the capital of the state of Israel. And since then, you've been watching nations moving their embassies to Jerusalem, which is an expression of saying this, we recognize this as your capital.
Yeah.
When you set up an embassy in a foreign country, you place the embassy in the capital city. When you think about that, when Trump made that bold move and declared Jerusalem to be the capital of the state of Israel, that is part of the budding. That I think that all of this is evidence that the fig tree is budding and blooming. And I would even take it further and say it's producing fruit, meaning that summer is upon us.
Yeah. And
that brings us to, what is summer?
Yeah, exactly. Then? Before you get there, though, I do want to take just a quick little break, speak to our audience.
You go, Tinkle?
Yeah, I need to go. So time out. Let's go, buddy system. Thank you for tuning in. You're streaming Studio 118. And thank you for watching this episode. You're probably watching on YouTube streaming there. Don't forget, we have a live chat going. Encourage you to drop in, say hi. And of course, we do have our Q&A session coming up in just a little while. So drop in a question about our topic today, living in the last days. It's a continuation from our last episode, part 1. And here we're focusing in on Matthew chapter 24. So thanks for tuning in. Also, if you're watching us on Austin Cable Access Channel 11, you can still submit a question to us. You can call our church. That number is 512-576-5433. Thanks for tuning in. Again, share this stream link on your social media platforms and just let people know what conversations we're having and encourage them to submit their questions, especially if you have any skeptical neighbors, family, friends. We'd love to hear from them and continue that conversation because we do believe that Christianity, there are good reasons to believe that Christianity is true. And especially given the topic for tonight, I think this is a very good pointer in the direction that Christianity is the true religion. Now, again, we're streaming here at Calvary South Austin, and just as a reminder, we do meet in person here on Sunday mornings at 9:15 and 11:15 a.m. So we invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings, and then also we meet midweek on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. If you would like more information as to about our church and what we believe and what we got going on, again, you feel free to jump on our website. You can go to calvarysouthAustin.com, or if you like it shorter, it's csa.church. You can also call our church to get more info. Again, that number is the same. It's 512-576-5433. So let's get back to our topic at hand. We're jumping in towards the end of Matthew chapter 24. We've established we're going through this parable of Jesus, talking about the parable of the fig tree, and we're getting into, what does it mean when we know the summer is near? So let's take it away there, Bunjee.
So just to go back over this text, but from Luke's account, he says, he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. And then he explains in verse 31, so you also, when you see these things happening, what things? Well, the things that he just listed. The wars, rumors of wars, the false teachers, the famines, the pestilences, the earthquakes happening with greater intensity and frequency. When you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till these things take place.
Yeah, so very much a parallel passage, but just includes a little bit more information for us there to give us an indication. What is he actually talking about?
Yeah, he's talking about the kingdom of God, the second coming of Christ, and the generation that sees these things happen will also see those things happen, right?
Very interesting.
In other words, the generation that sees these things ramping up with greater intensity and frequency will also be the generation that sees the second coming of Christ.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Can't get around that interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, he just gives us the parallel explanation there.
Those who have ears to hear.
Or eyes to read.
True international depression.
Go home, old man.
Please, before we're all bankrupt.
So the kingdom of God is near. This is something to look forward to. So when he's saying the kingdom of God is near, I mean, could that be, this is not the end of the age, the ultimate judgment, but this is the second coming of Christ when he comes to take away his bride. And then after this, you will begin to see tribulation,
right,
and the, what I want to say, the coming of the Antichrist and,
right,
and all those events after that.
Yep, that's the summer of someone's discontent. But
you read it? Okay.
But remember, this is all an answer to the question that you saw back in Matthew 24, verse 3. The question again, he's sitting on the Mount of Olives. They're looking at the temple. He just spoke about the destruction of the temple. The disciples come privately to him saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming, the end of the age?" So if you want to know what are we talking about with the coming of the kingdom, then we go back to the question that he's answering. The context is that the kingdom age is coming at the end of this age. And the kingdom age is coming when you see these things happening with greater frequency and intensity. Then you know that it won't be long.
Yeah.
Within this generation, the end of the age will come, and the kingdom age will begin, which is, the millennial kingdom.
Interesting.
But the summer, you think about summer, you think about heat.
Sure.
You think about, the tough months, when the heat is turned up and it's harder to work outside and these sorts of things, right? And so I can't help but to think about, the 7-year tribulation when it's going to get hot. Mm-hmm. And when you consider, everything that John writes about the tribulation time, there's the tribulation, first 3.5 years, followed by the great tribulation, the second 3.5 years after the abomination of desolation. All of that is a time you don't want to be here. Yeah. You do not want to be here. And yet I do believe that there are people here on the planet today that will probably go through the tribulation. Now, the reason I say that is because we're already seeing these things happening in greater intensity, greater frequency. Therefore, people in a generation that's alive today will be here to see the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
Are they little children right now? Are they middle-aged people right now? I don't know. So I'm not trying to set any dates.
Yeah.
And maybe it's going to get even more frequent and intense, before these signs are really locked in. But
this was, as we were discussing earlier, right? This is something even Paul believed was imminent in his own days.
Right.
So that's first century.
Correct.
So even from as shortly after Jesus leaves this plane of existence, you already had this feeling that, he's coming back soon.
Right.
Like, we're going to see this.
Yep. Yeah, totally. But one of the things that I always love to point out is that Satan basically has one play, which is to possess an individual and use that possession to rule the world. Mm-hmm. That's what Satan wants to do. And that's what the restrainer keeps stopping him from doing until the time is right. So that's why you see Satan tries the same thing every single time. he tried it with Haman, he tried it with Pharaoh, he tried it with Nero, he tried it with Hitler. So you see him trying the same gameplay. He wants to rule the world, and through the possession of that world ruler, who will be known as the Antichrist or the lawless one, right? Mm-hmm. And every time God stops him because it's not time yet.
This is the role of the restrainer that you were talking about.
This is the role of the restrainer, right? So, so that restraining role is now being accomplished also through the church. And so the removal of the restrainer is also the removal of the church, that's when the Antichrist is then given that's when the devil is given the green light to take a person and indwell that person and then begin to rule the world through that person. And, what's interesting is that, John in the book of Revelation actually describes this Antichrist using 4 beasts that can be traced back to the book of Daniel. So you've got the book of Daniel, you see these world governments being compared to certain animals, and then in the book of Revelation, John describes one beast coming up out of the sea, and it's an amalgamation of all these animals in one individual who we go on to learn that this is actually the Antichrist. Now, here's what's interesting about this is that it was a couple months ago when a giant statue in New York was set up right in front of the UN building there in New York City.
Where, New York?
New York City.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, that checks out.
Yep.
So, and then, one person who saw the statue and then commented on it, he says that it appears to very closely resemble a beast that is described in the book of Revelation. Did they really think that they could put this up in such a prominent place without anyone noticing?
Yes, actually. In New York.
Nobody knows what this is. So,
by the way, I love New York.
Do you?
I mean, to visit.
like if you were to go there, like what kind of pizza would you get? You think you'd stop by Sbarro's?
Yeah, Sbarro's number 1, man. I'll escape into this Catskill Mountains. That's the only place I want to go.
So without getting into all the details, that he does draw a comparison, and by looking at this interesting artwork, and it's an incredible piece of artwork, no doubt about it, but it does have some pretty good parallels between the beast, the Antichrist beast that John describes in Revelation 13, so yeah, it is very interesting, and if that's the case, then it's almost like the UN, which that is what the Antichrist is coming to do, is rule over the UN, basically. He is going to rule over the United Nations, and he will unite the nations together in worship first, also with a worldwide government, a monetary system, a healthcare system, all of this connected to some sort of implanted chip or mark of some sort, that if you don't receive this microchip or whatever the marking is, I would be hard pressed to think it would be something other than a microchip at this point. But if you don't receive this mark that is tied to the name of the Antichrist or the number of his name, then you're not going to be able to, have a bank account while honking your horn at the border of Canada and the United States of America. And
the name of this man is Trudeau.
So I don't think the Antichrist will be a Frenchman. But
yeah, Trudeau doesn't seem like a uniter of sorts, Yeah. We can discount him.
Oui.
Oui.
So So, with all of that, the first instinct is to start looking at individuals. And it wasn't too long ago when Matt and I, kind of rattled off a list of people who are believed to be the Antichrist. So, I don't think we should engage in any speculative calculations right now on who the Antichrist is, when the date is going to be, and all these sorts of things. Because remember, Jesus says no one knows the day or the hour. Yeah. Right? And the Antichrist won't be revealed until the restrainer is removed. That's what Paul says plainly. So if the restrainer isn't going to be revealed until the removal of, if the Antichrist isn't going to be revealed, if the lawless one isn't going to be identified until after the restrainer is removed, well, then why are Christians spending so much time trying to figure out who the Antichrist is?
Because it's fun.
It is fun. I'll give you that.
Yeah. My bet's on Kanye.
You think so?
I think yay. What's the over-under on yay?
Is it ye or yay?
I think it's yay.
Yay.
Kanye.
Gotcha.
Well, he calls himself Yeezy. I don't know, man.
I don't understand. I don't understand his relationship with Marilyn Manson now either. So.
Oh, I didn't even get that far.
Oh yeah.
Send me a link.
They're all Christians, right?
Yeah.
they're all Christians now.
Marilyn Manson, the guy from Wonder Years.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I picked him as a Christian a long time ago.
So, the sign of the fig tree does give us a clue that it seems, at least from our perspective, that we might be in these last days.
Yes. And that should be, that's been the cry of every generation, since Jesus left. And that should definitely be our cry. That should be at the forefront of our minds.
But we're the ones who have seen the rebirth of the fig tree.
Yes.
So,
very good indicator, yeah.
To me, that's a very strong indicator. But then Jesus provides us with another sign. So you've got the parable of the fig tree, but then he gives us a parallel between the days of Noah and the day of the coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah, so we just got through his parable here in Matthew 24, and now we're in this account where he refers back to the days of Noah. We're beginning there in verse 37, and I'll go ahead and read it. He mentions, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Interesting.
Yeah.
So again, he's referring back to the story of Noah,
yes,
which can be found in Genesis chapter 6. So let's go ahead and read that as well, just to give a little bit of background and some context here. So in Genesis 6, starting in verse 1, we read, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." All right, so that's a creepy passage there.
Very odd.
In the 6th chapter of the Bible.
Very strange, huh?
So you have these sons of God, that's the term used for them, sons of God, and they knew the daughters of men. Yeah, and they created this race of giants.
Some make the argument that the sons of God were like these sons of Seth or something like that, that, it was just, two groups that weren't supposed to intermarry, but, there's no biblical basis for that.
But the author, Moses goes out of his way to mention that they were giants.
So
so unnatural.
Not only that, but when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Mm-hmm. And so, the idea is that, there's some sort of unnatural offspring coming from, this unnatural form of procreation. So when Jesus back in Matthew 24 talks about, the marriages and giving in marriage, the audience understood the full context of Genesis 6.
Yes.
So he's speaking to an audience of Jews, first century Israelites who grew up on the Torah, studied Genesis 6, who knows how many times.
Yeah.
And it was typical for a rabbi to comment on an Old Testament passage with the assumption that the audience is taking the full context of that passage into consideration.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus talks about the days of Noah and the marriages that were happening, this is what he's talking about in the mind of the listener. This day when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And then these giants on the earth in those days, afterwards also, then the sons of God came into the daughters of men, that they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So we have sons of God, we have daughters of men, we have some sort of marriage, some sort of procreation. We see them producing these men of renown, and then also these giants, these Nephilim.
Yeah.
And I can't help but to wonder, is this historical account? And you might think, whoa, how do you know this isn't just allegory? How do you know that this isn't just a symbolic story meant to, convey some sort of, parabolic truth of morality and these sorts of things? That's how a lot of people treat the Old Testament, right? Mm-hmm. And to that I would say, well, the Lord Jesus is referring to this as history.
Right.
And we see him referring to many stories in the Old Testament as historical records. The creation of Adam and Eve,
yeah,
he refers to as a historical record. The story of Jonah and the great fish, he refers to as a historic record. He even talks about how the events that happened with Jonah and the fish was actually a sign of his resurrection. And he says, as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days, so too the Son of Man will be in the earth. So he's referring to these Old Testament stories as historical events, and that's exactly what he does here with Noah. Mm-hmm. He's saying, hey, just like it was in the days of Noah, the literal, actual, historical days of Noah, so too, when my day comes, when my return happens, there's a parallel that's going to, unfold.
Yeah.
So, now I get it. There's a bunch of smarty pants scholars, who think that they can take, higher criticism and pick apart the Old Testament scriptures and try to tell us which parts are historical and which parts aren't. I'm going to take Jesus' word for it. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I'm going to believe in the incarnate Word of God, that He knows which parts are history. And so when He says,
maybe
these were days,
yeah,
possibly, but when He says, hey, these things happened, I don't care how many, PhDs you have. Mm-hmm. The Lord Jesus is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He is the author of all of history. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows what happened, during the days of Noah. Yeah. And He confirms it here in Matthew 24. So, could this historical account that the Spirit of God led Moses to write, could this be the historical origin of the Greek stories about Olympians fighting giants?
Never heard that take before, yeah. Interesting.
So we have these interesting stories that the Romans tell, the Greeks tell. Do we find here the origin of those mythologies? I think we do. But then it wasn't just, something happening here with fallen angels and human women in the creation of, what they're here called mighty men of old, men of renown, or these people were probably saying, hey, we're the ancient of days, we're the God men, okay, we're the Hercules, we're the the half, God, half men individuals, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening. But not only that, in Genesis 6, beginning at verse 5, Moses says that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Wow. I mean, it sounds like Moses is describing our news today.
Yes.
And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. So the people on the planet during the days of Noah were completely given over to their evil desires. Just completely given over to every evil desire, which included, every kind of sexual sin. But not only that, well, they were also engaging in abortion, but not the way that we perform it today. This was happening through child sacrifice.
Yeah, they waited.
So you're engaging in all sorts of sexual sin. You don't want this baby. You didn't intend to have this baby. This baby's going to keep you from earning a paycheck, or going to school, or having the life that you wanted. So what do? You cast it into the fires of Molech.
Yeah.
And so the Lord was ready to remove mankind from the face of the earth. But then it says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, which is one of the most beautiful passages in the Bible.
Yeah.
The story of grace is found here in the story of Noah. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And then it goes on to talk about his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So what does that mean that Noah was perfect in his generations? Is Moses saying that he was sinless?
About that.
Can that be a biblical
No.
perspective on Noah, that he was without sin?
Nope.
Yeah, Paul says that we've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. So, we can't assume here. So he was a just man, but that doesn't mean he was sinless,
Sure.
But it does say he was perfect, but the qualifier being there that he was perfect in his generations.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to talk about his sons. So you have a man who's perfect in his generations, and that's in contrast to what here? The flesh that had been corrupted on the earth, right? So Noah, perfect in his generations, or in other words, perfect in his bloodline, he had a perfectly human bloodline in comparison to the rest of flesh, which was corrupt. That word corrupt or corrupted, it's Genesis 6:12, God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. That Hebrew word corrupted speaks of that which is ruined, spoiled, and perverted. So Moses here telling us that all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth, it seems to suggest here that the entire world was spoiled because the physical flesh of the human race had somehow been perverted, which then seems to be tied to the interaction with fallen angels. So then that brings up the question, how do fallen angels procreate with humans?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, right? Is it possible that they were shapeshifters? Is it possible that they, were somehow, able to impregnate women? Or is it that they had a higher level of knowledge and they were able to take sperm from men, engage in some form of genetic modification, and then artificially inseminate women? I mean, I would assume that angels, being older and much more intelligent than humans, humans have figured out how to engage in artificial insemination. Humans have discovered how to engage in genetic modifications. So is it a stretch to think that an angelic being would know how to do this during the days of Noah.
Yeah.
Of course, we see Peter talking about how God took those angels, and Jude also tells us how God took these fallen angels who left their proper domain and has kept them in chains since then. So this wasn't happening with all the angels, but there was a certain class or number of angels who were coming, and from what I can tell, engaging in some sort of genetic modification of human semen, artificially inseminating women, and creating something that Moses says corrupted all the flesh.
Yeah.
And in comparison, Noah was perfect in his generations. So why would God flood the world and kill off all of the humans except for one family?
Because the entire human population was spoiled.
It does appear that way.
Yeah.
You know, that is one interpretation of this text that I think is the most true to the terms.
Yeah.
Very strange, huh?
Yes.
But then let's not forget, Jesus is saying, hey, remember the days of Noah?
Exactly.
That's what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to be like before the second coming. So what would that look like?
Well, if we draw the parallel, you have, well, one the big one that you mentioned, what I caught was abortion, right? And also the idea of every thought of man is continually evil, and combine that with the rest of what chapter 24 is talking about, of increasing intensity and frequency of evil acts. But now, so there's still a question mark of this modification of where do those Nephilim fit in here?
Yeah. Yeah, is it possible that fallen angels would masquerade as aliens?
Yep, possible. And this is a past episode that we've covered as well.
Yeah, we talked about it last month, and we kind of stuck our toe in the water on this at the end of our time the last show, right? But I just wanted to back up a little bit and just consider a few more testimonies here. One coming from the book of Enoch, and I don't want to give this book of Enoch. Number one, I don't know that the actual biblical character Enoch wrote this book. There's no evidence for that. Mm-hmm. And some people treat the book of Enoch like it should belong in the Bible, and I don't know that there's any real evidence to support that argument. But it does provide us with some interesting information about this whole Genesis 6 story from at least the perspective of an ancient individual who wrote this account. And it's in, whoever the author of Enoch is, it's in the 19th chapter of this extra biblical book where we read, "Here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods." So according to this account that we find in Enoch, we see that there was some, if this is true to history, which I can say that of the Bible without question. Enoch, I'm not so sure about. But if this is true to history, then the events happening in Genesis chapter 6 was resulting in the worship of demons as gods because of what these fallen angels were leading people to do. Another account, it comes to us from a 2nd century Christian apologist named Justin Martyr. He weighs in on this in his second apology, and here's the statement that he made. He says, "The angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by love of women and begot children, who are those that are called demons. And besides, they afterwards subdued the human race to themselves, partly by magical writings, and partly by fears and the punishments they occasioned, and partly by teaching them to offer sacrifices and incense and libations, of which things they stood in need after they were enslaved by lustful passions. And among men they sowed murders, wars, adulteries, intemperate deeds, and all wickedness." So here's this, early second century Christian apologist weighing in on Genesis chapter 6 and just kind of describing what the fallen angels were leading humans to do, which, kind of goes back to the way that Moses described the great wickedness of mankind on the earth. And so with all that in mind, the question then being, what would these so if we expect to see a return of these fallen angels and them interacting with the human race, even to the point where they could even engage in some sort of genetic manipulation to help us to get to the next stage of evolution. Yeah. Does that play out? Does that make sense when Jesus says, hey, the days of Noah will be the way that the days of Noah were, so too will be the coming of the Son of Man? Does that mean we should expect to see a ramping up of alien interaction?
That'd be interesting.
Here on the planet.
Yeah.
And that gets us back to something that we talked about last month, which is that NASA is actually hiring religious leaders to prepare for encounters with aliens.
Yes, I remember that.
How about that?
Yes. Yes, and my tax dollars are paying for this?
Yeah, that's right.
Do I have a say?
Hey, this isn't the craziest thing your tax dollars are paying for. So cut them some slack here,
Yeah, honestly, yeah. This seems far-fetched for me. I get it. And
very far-fetched.
But I understand, it's very, very interesting to read that even Justin Martyr, 2nd century, and they already had this formulation of the same kind of ideas being thrown out. Like, okay, this was just not in an earthly domain, but this was something supernatural occurring, mixing in with the natural and creating something crazy. So he calls them demons, right? So, yeah, this is very crazy stuff. But yeah, so.
And some people hold the theory that the demons aren't fallen angels, but rather the spirits of the dead Nephilim. So according to one theory on this is that the Nephilim, or the giants, died in the flood, and that their spirits became the demons. I don't believe that personally. I think that there's biblical reason to think that demons are a class of fallen angels. Mm-hmm. And I've laid that argument out in some other studies for why I don't believe in the Nephilim, dead spirit becoming demons. First of all, I don't know that God breathed His spirit into the Nephilim. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they had a spirit that could then continue living on, past the flood.
Yeah.
So, but it is interesting that Justin Martyr seems to hold that position. And when I get to heaven, I'll ask him why.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
So yeah, one theory or one speculation that we have here is the increase of interactions with aliens, and we talked about that a little bit about the last episode. But we've also had an entire episode dealing with alien and UFOs.
That's right. Yep.
And our theories there about what these interactions could be and what they possibly mean, and some of the details that we hear about testimonies being given after the fact of some abductions or just interactions, and very spiritual in nature. And
are these people microdosing or
yes.
getting abducted?
Yeah, and but yeah, they also have that spiritual overtone of being promised certain spiritual guarantees and just weird stuff that you wouldn't expect an alien to be throwing out, right?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting stuff. So
if this is a proper interpretation of Genesis 6, mm-hmm. and it's a big if, but if it is, then it would only stand to reason that we should see something similar happening all the way up to the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only this interaction with the aliens, but just the general wickedness that we're seeing, including the increase in sexual sin and whatnot.
And a blind wickedness. Mm-hmm. Because Noah, who Peter calls a preacher of righteousness, so clearly he was preaching, He was warning people. And yet not one person warned jumped on that boat.
Yep.
And I've heard it said that Noah was a conspiracy theorist until it started raining.
Nice. Yes.
And then all of a sudden, you know,
that sounds familiar.
YouTube started letting those videos get published.
No, they still suppress them. That's what happens.
Right till I die. Yeah, interesting stuff, you know.
Yeah, this is all a lot of mind-blowing stuff for me, I can tell you that. But so, yeah, let's try to summarize essentially what we're getting at here.
Best.
Yes. What is the point in speaking of all this? But so let's kind of work our way back as to what we've been discussing so far, right? In Matthew chapter 24, essentially, it all starts off with the questions that the disciples of Jesus are asking, and when will these things take place? Especially the destruction of the temple, and then Jesus goes on to describe the signs of what to watch out for of when these things will take place, the coming of the kingdom of the age, right? And last month we went through all the descriptions of the earthquakes, pestilences, and love of people growing cold. And then we jumped to verse 32, and that's what we focused in here on today, on these two parables or illustrations that Jesus uses to give us more clues, more indicators as to what to look out for. So this fig tree, and which typically represents the nation of Israel, and this budding of the fig tree, what does that mean? And but when we see this budding of the fig tree, that's when we know we're inching very, very, very close.
This generation.
Yes, this generation will see all these things come to pass.
Yes.
And couple that with the next illustration of what we just went through, the days of Noah, and they were being married and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. But it wasn't the marriage that we think of, wedding feasts and whatnot, but this was a
debauchery.
Yes, a debauchery.
Revelries.
Yes, and some weird elements there of a weird race of giants and these Nephilim and the men of renown and whatnot. But will we see that today? And speculation of, okay, well, we know there is this speculation that, alien interactions perhaps in this day and age could be demonic. Especially given that they have that spiritual overtone in the testimonies that we hear. But then also the general increase of wickedness in the world. Right. And that's what happened in the days of Noah that caused God to regret his decision of creating man in the first place. But he had that one surviving bloodline in Noah, and whom he chose to save there and start over.
Yes.
But all these indicators that we've gone from last episode to this episode are essentially warning signs for the Christian of watch out for these, and you will know, and it's very, very close, as you mentioned, even in this generation, this is when the second coming is going to happen.
Yep.
Good news, bad news. Good news, if you're a Christian, and you're part of the church, you're part of the into the adopted family of Jesus Christ, you're going to escape what comes after. And so in a sense, we should look forward to that day. When we see, it's kind of a bittersweet thing. Things have to get worse before they get better.
Right.
So when you see the world just kind of crumbling before your eyes, know that the coming of the Lord is near, and that we're going to escape this, even though we're blessed to have this time on earth and enjoy the God's creation, but ultimately we're strangers, we're pilgrims, we're sojourners. Our true home is in heaven, in the presence of God. So in that sense, we should be looking forward to it. Yeah. But in another sense, we know that there's a lot of people around us that don't know Christ yet. And to those, we, again, by being aware of all these things that we should be looking out for, that should light a fire underneath us to go and, again, just preach the gospel as much as we can to the people around us.
Yeah. I like what Jesus says there in Luke 21. He says, now when these things begin to happen. So earlier on, he was like, hey, this is just the beginning of sorrows. Things are going to ramp up. It's going to get more intense. It's going to become more frequent. But Jesus here says, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads because your redemption draws near. So, a discussion like this could easily put someone on edge and cause great stress and fear. And yet Jesus is saying, no. Don't be troubled by these things. Rather, let them be a reminder, an indicator light that your redemption is drawing near every day. Every day it's nearer. And so when we see these things happening, it should just be a reminder to us that it won't be long. Mm-hmm. The time is short. Even if we should live the rest of our lives, life is still like a vapor of smoke. Mm-hmm. It's here 1 minute and then gone. And so every time we see these indicator signs, every time we see these signs of the times, they should serve to remind us that we have a limited window to reach the people around us so that they might escape the wrath of God. The believer is not appointed to wrath, and the wrath of God will be poured out during the time of tribulation. So we will not be here for that time. We will not be here through the tribulation time, right? And I recognize that we've probably got some people watching that are pre-wrath, and post-restrainer removal, and there's time for those arguments and whatnot. But in my understanding of the scriptures, when the restrainer is removed prior to the rise of the Antichrist, the church will be removed too, because we were not appointed to wrath. And we have been sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. Mm-hmm. So when the Holy Spirit is removed, we will be removed with the Holy Spirit, and then the Antichrist will be revealed, followed by the wrath of God being poured out upon this earth. And so I want everyone that I love and care about to go in the rapture. Should I have the privilege of being caught up in the rapture myself, I want everybody that I know to be caught up in the rapture as well, which is why, all of these indicator signs remind me that the time is short. Let's get busy. Let's accomplish the Great Commission. Let's lead people to Jesus so that they can be caught away as well. And that's the point that Peter's getting to here in 2 Peter 3. Says, therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, talking about, the end of the age, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I love it. And this has been a great couple of episodes, just looking forward, as it were. So usually we're looking at evidences from the past that give good reason for us to believe in Christianity. But here we have an opportunity here to look forward now and consider the prophecies, especially of that Jesus was making. And I wanted to insert it at the beginning, but this is just good time as any. But talking again to our skeptical friends out there, of if you're considering Christianity, or perhaps you just tuned in and you're thinking, well, I think Christianity is a joke and this is just another reason, look at them speculating about the future and whatnot. But again, when you consider out of the mouth of who, right? This is Jesus we're talking about. And go look at last month's episode and how we established that Jesus is giving us a track record with which to trust his words.
Yeah.
But also, when you consider Christianity and you see how it sets itself apart from every other religion, this is just another example here where a bunch of other big-time religions, they have their own set of prophecies, or they're trying to answer big questions about where do we come from, what are we doing here, and also where are we going, what comes after this life. And Christianity, again, just over and over, and this is no exception here, but it sets itself apart from every other religion in giving us clear understanding, clear details as to what to look for, and also where we're going. There is an end game. God is kind of showing his hand, but because he's God, he knows the end from the beginning. He has the power to work all things according to his will. And with every other religion, you don't have these characters that do that. I'm thinking of Islam, right, where you have Prophet Muhammad, and some of the prophecies, I guess if you can consider them prophecies, and they don't come to pass. They're false prophecies. You look at Mormonism and Joseph Smith and prophecies that they tried to think that they were going to come to pass, and they never did. And so you have all these religions, and time again, Christianity sets itself apart. So to the skeptic, again, I would just urge you to take a deeper look at Christianity and the reasons to believe. And one of them here that we're talking about today is not only looking back through history, but also looking forward as to what are the things to watch out for, and take note of some of them and see, are these things actually coming to pass? And perhaps that might give you another good reason to take a second look at Christianity. So good stuff, Bunjee. Now is the time where we enter into our Q&A session. I will note that in just a couple of minutes here, we're going to quit streaming to Austin Cable Access Channel 11. But I invite you to, if you're watching on Channel 11, I invite you to jump on the web and jump on our YouTube stream. Search for Studio 118 and Living in the Last Days, and you'll probably see our live stream link there. And that's where we'll continue our Q&A session. We do have a few questions lined up, so we want to just get that going. But in a couple minutes, I will just take a quick break, and then we'll jump back on after that short break and continue our Q&A session. But let's get to our at least one question here, and then we'll get it going. So first question here, Bunjee, is a character named Mike, and he asks, so unbelieving Jews get saved, or do you believe that there will be a miraculous mass repentance claiming Jesus as Lord?
Good question. So when we consider the question about the salvation of the Jews, it's important to understand that Jesus was a Messiah, is the Messiah, but he was sent to the Jew first, and then also to the Greek. And so that's exactly what Paul is saying in Romans 1. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Now, the gospel is the message, the good news on how we're saved, right? So he says, I'm ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. So the salvation of the Jew is not by law, never was. Hebrews 11 presents us with the hall of faith and gives us a list of all the Old Testament saints, not every single one of them, but the ones that we find there in the hall of faith. They're all Old Testament Jews. They're the saints of God by faith. It was by faith that Noah received the grace of God. So again, the Jewish Messiah is sent to the Jew first, and also for the Greek, and those who believe in the gospel of Christ are saved. Now, at the end of the church age, you go back to now the 70th week of Daniel, and still salvation is by faith. But the 144,000 will believe in the gospel message. Then they will look upon him whom they pierced at the very end, and they will look up and see Jesus Christ and recognize who the Savior is. And so with that, that should answer the question.
Nice, succinct. Hey, we'll catch you in just 1 minute on YouTube. All right, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. We're in our Q&A portion right now. We just answered one question, and we got a few more lined up here about living in the last days. Let me carry on to the next question. Jodakant, if that's how you pronounce it, asks, the proverbial they found the red heifer, right? Pastor Ray Bentley was involved in that finding right before he passed and went to be with the Lord.
So he answers his own question.
With a source and everything. Nice.
So yes, they do have the red heifer.
So this is the red heifer you were mentioning, where in order to anoint.
I like to call him the ginger cow, but
Nice,
that's something else altogether.
Maybe that's not so PC. But yes, this was the one to anoint the temple.
Yeah,
as it were.
Okay. I mean no offense. My sister was a redhead.
Yeah.
She is. She was and is. But so yeah, I grew up
and ever will be.
And with our last name being Garrett, she grew up being called Christy Carrot. Nice. Sad.
I thought you were gonna say Leaf Garrett or something.
No.
Who was a redhead as well, right?
Yes.
All right. But Pastor Ray Bentley, is this any truth to this? Do you remember hearing anything about this?
You know, I don't. This is the first I've heard that Ray Bentley was involved in locating the red heifer. But my understanding is that they do have their hands on a bloodline of red heifers now.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
Let's check out another question from Mike here. I don't see how the Lord would see animal sacrifice as being a sweet savor after Jesus' sacrifice. Okay. So he asks, there seems to be a disconnect between would God approve of continual animal sacrifices with that third temple, I guess?
Well, so, the question's a little bit loaded in the sense that the Jews choosing to build a third temple and offer animal sacrifices is pleasing to the Lord. So is it post sacrifice of Jesus Christ? Now, it does appear that there is some level of sacrifice being offered in the millennial kingdom. And I don't know exactly what to make of that, seeing how the millennial kingdom will be a complete refurbishing of the creation itself. And so in what sense is there any kind of sacrifice being offered in the millennial kingdom? We don't really have a good way to answer that question at this period of time. But I think if I understand Mike's question, he's asking about the third temple and the sacrifices that will be offered for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And then the implication here being, why would God want this if Jesus is the sacrifice that all of the Old Covenant sacrifices were actually pointing to? And so the fact of sacrifices being offered at a third temple, during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, just because it is prophetically revealed that this will happen doesn't mean that the Lord is the one asking for it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is he merely presenting us with these are things that are going to happen, just the mere fact of it,
right?
But not necessarily giving his approval one way or the other.
Right. Yeah. The Bible also talks about the Antichrist bringing an end to sacrifices. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's just a statement of fact. That is going to happen. Right. It's not necessarily the Lord calling the Antichrist to make that move. The Antichrist will implement a mark and force everyone to receive it. That is a statement of fact that is going to take place. Doesn't mean that the Lord is pleased with this thing happening, right? Yeah. So, I think Mike needs to understand that just because the Bible tells us about something happening doesn't mean that the Lord is enjoying. We even learned that he's patient with the wicked, so that they might come to repentance. Yeah. So, just because the Israelites are offering sacrifices at the third temple doesn't mean that God is in heaven saying, "Oh, this is a sweet smelling, aroma, yeah. and I love this," right?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
good. Back to Joda Kent. Who are the tribulation saints? And also, is refusal to take the mark and being killed for that refusal sufficient for one's salvation? Interesting.
So the tribulation age saints, are the believers during the time of tribulation. So the Old Testament saints were the believers who were alive during the Old Testament times. The church age saints aren't, canonized and turned into statues at the local Catholic Church. Yet. The church age saints are believers in the church age. The tribulation age saints are the believers in the time of tribulation. That will include Jews and Gentiles, though we do see a major shift back, God's attention being redirected, back to the Jew, and we see the 144,000 witnesses. Not, they are Jehovah's Witnesses, but not in the sense of the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? They might be knocking on doors, but we're not really sure at this point. But yeah, so the tribulation age saints are just the believers during the tribulation age. Most of them will be Jewish, with the 144,000 evangelists going out and preaching the gospel. And then the rest of the question is...
refusal to take the mark being sufficient for one's salvation.
Absolutely not. Here's what I would say about that is that salvation isn't based on things we never did, right? Think about it like this. When you do the wrong thing, then you have a sin debt. Mm-hmm. When you do the right thing, it's what you should have done anyway.
Yep.
So there's no kudos, right, so to speak, or there's no reward for you just doing what you were supposed to do in the first place, right? So then in the abstinence, when you abstain from doing something that you shouldn't do, well, that's just the mirror
right.
of doing the right thing. Right. When you abstain from doing the wrong thing, well, that's correct. You shouldn't have done the wrong thing. So when you didn't, you were just doing the right thing by not doing the wrong thing, right? So then So taking the mark, which is an act of worship, I mean, that's the way it's described, is that the false prophet will come along, force everybody to worship, bow before the Antichrist, and in the process of this act of worship, you're receiving this mark through mass formation psychosis. So in that you're pledging your heart to the Antichrist, and you're proving it through this mark that you'll receive on the right hand or forehead, right? Thanks to probably Bill Gates, but salvation is by faith in Jesus Christ. Mm. That's true of the Old Testament. Yeah. They looked forward to the promises of the Messiah and were saved by that. And then they waited in Abraham's bosom until the day when the Messiah came and presented the fullness of the gospel to those who had died in faith, believing in the prophecies that they had. We see messianic prophecies all the way back in Genesis, right? We see Adam and Eve receiving the very first of the messianic prophecies in the curse that was delivered, that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, right? Very first messianic prophecy right there. And they believed in that promise. And by that faith in the promise of this coming Savior who would crush the head of the serpent, they were saved by that faith. Now, they didn't have the fullness. They didn't have all the information. There's still a dispensation of information that would continue to unfold until the arrival of the Messiah. But those who took the prophecies of the Messiah that they had and placed their faith in those prophecies, upon their death, they would go to Abraham's bosom and wait. And there they waited until the crucifixion, and when the Messiah went and revealed the fulfillment of the Old Testament messianic prophecies to those who had already believed in him. Now they see the fullness of the gospel, and that's when they also resurrected and went into the presence of the Father, right? Yeah. So in the Old Testament, the saints were saved by faith in the Messiah, though they waited in Abraham's bosom until they received the fullness of that information, so that they could then fully believe in that moment, though they had already been sealed into that faith, in which they died, right? So then the church age saint is also now looking back to the cross. The Old Testament saint was looking forward to the cross. The church age saint looks back to the cross, and by faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ, we are saved. And then the same will be true for the tribulation age saint. They will also be saved by faith in the gospel of grace, which is the message of Jesus Christ and how he died for our sins on the cross. So if you add a work to that, Paul says you're anathema. Or if you kind of give the mirror image of that, well, I didn't do this bad work, and so therefore that's what saves me. Right. No, Jesus accomplished our salvation on the cross with his work. There's nothing we can do to add to it.
Yeah. So gospel doesn't change just because church age is done. Got it.
Correct.
Good. Here we have another question. In Matthew 24, verses 40 and 41, is the word taken referring to the rapture or the second coming? If second coming, does it mean believers and unbelievers will be separated right away? So Matthew 24.
Yeah, that's. I'm actually tackling that in Luke. Luke's parallel from that. I'll be tackling that here in a couple of weeks on Sunday morning.
Can I read it real quick?
And yeah, please do.
Yeah, 40 and 41. Then two men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. So taken.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways to look at this. And, I don't know that I've settled in my own mind exactly how to lock this down. So, one way to look at this is that, you have, a rapture of a believer, and then that being the taken one, followed by the other going into the tribulation, where judgment will be poured out, for that 7-year period. That's one way to look at this. One is, the believer is taken and the unbeliever goes into the tribulation. Another way to look at this is that this happens at the second coming of Christ, and it's the unbeliever who's taken and judged while the believer enters into the millennial kingdom. We do know that there will be humans not in a glorified state who will enter into the millennial kingdom and will procreate and populate the planet during that 1,000-year reign of Christ. So you could, offer me either one of those arguments, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So, sorry I can't, give you something more definitive, but, at this point, I really could go either way on this one.
Does Luke, like he did with the other parables, does he give any other information in that statement?
No.
It's pretty much verbatim.
Yeah. It's from what I can tell, it's pretty much the same situation, same words. I'll get a little bit more in depth into this, as I'm preparing that message, and I might start leaning one way or another at that point. But as it stands right now, I could see this being the rapture, the rapture of one person and the tribulation judgment for the other, or the being taken to judgment of one and the other being sent into the millennial kingdom. So I could go either way on it.
Okay. Maybe we should ask Liam Neeson.
Yes, he does have a unique set of skills.
Nice. All right, back to Joda Kent. The rapture would crush the USA since so many millions would suddenly be missing. How can that possibly be explained in a way that does not confirm the Bible?
Yeah, I think I think that's believing the best about people.
Are you talking about like the realistic amount of Christians that will be?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that the rapture of the church will be as massive an event as Joda Kent is thinking.
Are you calling Tim LaHaye a liar?
Maybe. Sorry, Tim. But yeah, I just not to say that it's going to be a non-event. But when I look at the state of the church and then factor in the great apostasy, which I believe we're in the middle of, and when I consider surveys where those who claim to be Christian are rejecting one or more of the essential doctrines of the Christian faith, thereby showing that they aren't actually a Christian, I don't know that millions will be suddenly missing in a rapture event.
Interesting.
So maybe I'm wrong, but I've seen a lot of surveys. I've seen a lot of shenanigans. I've seen a lot of, Christianity that leads me to think, really? That, if your church is teaching that you need to go to get your wafer,
yes,
for your salvation, that your salvation is based on eating a wafer, that somehow magically turned into the body of Jesus Christ, and that he's being continually crucified because he didn't finish the work on the cross. If that's what your church is teaching, that Jesus doesn't exist, and that Jesus can't save you. If your church teaches that you have a cosmic Jesus who was once a man and through eternal progression became a God, that Jesus doesn't exist, and so therefore that Jesus can't save you. If your church teaches that you can only be saved in their water as you state the name of Jesus Christ as you're being dunked, that's adding works to salvation. That Jesus can't. I just took out 3 major denominations.
Right.
Denomination being used loosely.
Loosely here, yeah.
But I just took out 3 large chunks of people claiming to be Christian.
Yeah.
And I don't know what all the people in these groups believe. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't tell you what every single person in these churches believes. Maybe they believe in the true gospel, right? Maybe they believe in the true Jesus and they just go to the wrong church.
Yeah.
But if they believe what their leaders are teaching, it's a false gospel, it's a false Jesus. Those people are not being raptured.
Yeah.
So,
but even if it's not a large event as people believe, yes, it would still be an event where people go missing.
No doubt. And I do believe that will be explained away by the alien interaction of false fallen angels.
That's your take. All right.
So yeah, I do lean towards the belief that there will be greater and greater alien interaction with the human race, that they will come and genetically modify humans and prepare us for climate change, and they will be, informing mankind that those who won't take their special vaccines will have to be removed.
Is one of them Greta?
How dare you? So
dancing to Rick. Yes.
She did Rickroll the world, didn't she?
Yeah, she did.
It's good. She did good.
It's quality. It's quality.
So, but I think that's a very plausible explanation.
It will be explained away so as not to, people won't be left in awe of like, oh, Christianity is the one. Okay.
Yeah. If some alien came along and said, we're going to get rid of everyone who refuses to wear the mask. Mm-hmm. There would be a lot of people who would be like, awesome, yeah, let's get them out of here. Yeah. We're gonna get rid of everyone who honks their horn at the border. Oh yeah, let's get rid of those people. Yeah. If they came along and said, hey, we're going to get rid of these Christians. Mm-hmm. These aliens came along and said, yes, it's the Christians that are really getting in the way here. They're subhumans. Let's. Mm-hmm. I think there would be a lot of people in the world who'd be like, yep, makes sense.
Would this be part of like strong delusions? But also you'd have to explain, why, if this is such a large event, right, why would there still be unbelievers after that kind of stuff? And so it'd have to be explained away somehow. Yeah,
and then there is the verse about strong delusion upon those who knew the truth but did not love the truth. Mm-hmm. And so God sends upon them strong delusion. And how does that factor in?
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Looks like we got one more question here. Can you describe the last days from the perspective of the transition from the dispensation of grace to the dispensation of the millennial kingdom? Can you?
It's a good question, and I appreciate the question, because it is something that I've scrambled my brain over. Like the humans who enter into the millennial kingdom. From my estimation and my understanding is that it's at the second coming of Christ when the elements will melt with fervent heat and the universe is refurbished. And, where are the humans at this point in time as the new heavens and new earth are created? What's the transition time to bring the New Jerusalem down, to the earth? I have no understanding of this. It's beyond my ability to even think through just logistically, let alone just the practical aspects of elements melting with fervent heat and being regenerated into something that is free from the curse. Yeah. So, sorry, but the best 3 words I can offer are these: I don't know.
Powerful words.
I just don't know. Yeah.
Well, there you have it.
I'm never going to let you go.
Never going to give you up.
I'm never going to give you up.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Bunjee, thank you for that. I learned a lot. Thank you very much. This is good stuff. And I think this is, again, just to issue one more encouragement for our audience out there is when you see these things happening, this is the beginning of sorrows. And it looks like these things are happening. So, fret not.
Your head.
Yes, lift up your head. Your redemption draws near. So let's get busy, Christians. And with that, I want to thank you again for streaming into another episode of Studio 118. As we mentioned earlier, next month, which is actually just in a couple of weeks, we'll be having another episode. And this one, we'll be talking about Jehovah's Witnesses and what they believe about Jesus. So I hope you join us for that. But until then, we invite you to, again, check us out at calvarysouthaustin.com. We'd love to see you here in person on Sundays and Wednesdays. And we'll sign off. I'm Reuben. This is Bunjee. And we'll catch you later.